Alright guys, this is Mr. Powers, and you are going to be learning about a microeconomics topic called market structure. Every business in the United States falls under one of four structures, and a structure is defined as how that business operates, how they compete with price, do they advertise. So we have four types here. We have perfect competition, monopoly, monopolistic competition, and an oligopoly. So let's move on. All right, so we look at some questions like, what is a market structure? These are some questions to consider. What does a bushel of wheat have in common with a share of Microsoft stock? What's so perfect about perfect competition? Why don't monopolies last? And so forth. So what we'll do in the next few slides is we'll distinguish the features of each of the four market structures. Perfect competition, and then we'll look at monopoly, and we'll talk about something called barriers to entry, which is basically how difficult it is to get into that market. And we'll compare the market structures of monopoly and competition. These are some key terms. Market structure is how every business is set up and which of the four categories it falls in. Perfect competition refers to the fact that a company is in a market where they have thousands of competitors. So every company is really small and has very little control over price. A commodity is something, it's a good that's the same no matter who sells or produces it, like eggs and gas and milk. A monopoly is a company that dominates an entire market. A barrier to entry is how hard it is to start a business up. It's the hardest in a monopoly market, as you saw with the game, because you're up against one giant producer. And market power is how much power one company has over an entire market. All right, you can read market structure. These are important features of the market, and here are the key things. How many buyers are in the market? Is the product uniform across sellers, meaning does one farmer produce one type of egg, another farmer the exact same type of egg? Or like with fast food, does McDonald's has the Whopper, Burger King has the Whopper, McDonald's has the Big Mac and things like that. Those products are not the same. How easy is it to get in the market, and how are you competing? So perfect competition is the first structure we look at. It's a market structure with many fully informed buyers and sellers of an identical product. It's very easy to get in. I use the example of if I just want to go sell some firewood on the side of the road, that's simple to get into, and all the firewood is the same. It's perfectly competitive. There are thousands of guys doing that, and all the firewood is the same. It's an all identical product, and that's what a commodity is. Examples of markets: shares of large corporation. This is stock. All stock is perfectly competitive. It's all the same. It's no matter what stock you buy and what company, it's just a piece of paper, and it says you own part of that company, and it's identical. And there are thousands of companies you can buy from on the stock market, so it's perfectly competitive. Foreign exchange, that's where you trade dollars for foreign currency, and all you're trading are dollars. You could go trade some dollars for yen to go on a Japanese vacation. Another guy in Japan's trading yen for dollars. It's all a commodity. Agricultural products are all commodities. They're all identical. Corn is corn is corn. Wheat is wheat. It doesn't matter who's selling it. And there are thousands of farmers. No single farmer has control over his product. Here are some key questions to ask when you're looking at market structure. How many buyers and sellers are there? Are there many, only a few, or just one? Is the product uniform? How easy is it to get in? Can new firms get in easily? And do firms compete based only on prices? Or are any advertising and product differences important? We'll talk about it. All right, so the market price is determined by the intersection of the market's demand curve We went over this already. Let me show you what this is. This is one firm in a perfectly competitive market. So in this case, we're going to look at a wheat farmer. There's some wheat. And the wheat farmer, this is the entire market that he's a part of. When he goes to sell his wheat, he drags his wheat down the road, and there's a big giant market, and he sets up his wheat and he tries to sell it. And when he does, there are hundreds of thousands of other farmers trying to sell their wheat too. Well, here's the demand curve for all that wheat and supply curve for all that wheat. But this is Farmer Brown. This is the one farmer's demand curve. And what this means is he's so small. There's so many thousands. It's a perfectly competitive situation that he can't affect the price. What that means is he has to take what that price, what the market gives him. He can't just stand up in that market and say, I'm going to sell my wheat for $10 a share, and everybody's going to laugh at him. He has to take the price the market is giving him. So no matter how much people want or demand of his wheat, he's got to sell it at $5. That's his only. All right. A monopoly is the sole supplier of a product with no close substitutes. And then monopolies have a really big market power. That's the ability of a firm to raise its price without losing sales to other companies. That's how you know you have a monopoly. It's when you can just jack up the price and everybody keeps buying from you. You don't lose any sales. It's because customers have nowhere else. Now, it's very difficult. There are barriers to getting into monopoly. For example, Alabama Power is a monopoly. If it's easy to start a little roadside firewood stand, it's not easy to start a power company. They're huge. There are legal restrictions, which means Alabama Power is protected by the government. Alabama Power controls all the resources, the power grids, and Alabama Power produces economies of scale, which means, you know how when you scale a mountain, you are climbing the mountain? Economies of scale means when a company gets bigger and bigger and bigger, they get better and better and better at making their product. To make their product, it gets cheaper and cheaper and cheaper. And it's hard to compete with that. Monopolists, however, may not earn a profit. The demand for the good may not be great enough to keep the monopolist in business. A lot of monopolies go out of business, believe it or not. Now, you can also have something called a local monopoly. This is when there's only one gas station in a small town. They're not necessarily big, but they're still the monopoly. True monopolies are rare. Here are some examples. The railroads had a monopoly in the 19th century. Local cable TV providers. Like we only get Charter in Hoover, I believe. And local phone service, like AT&T. The U.S. Postal Service used to have a monopoly on getting letters. Of course, this has been replaced. This has replaced the Postal Service. Wireless cell phones have replaced your local home phone. The trucking industry almost killed the railroad industry. So monopolies don't last forever because they get competitors. Monopolies are relatively rare. They can lose money and they're not guaranteed profit. Here are some things about monopoly versus perfect competition. The reason these are covered first is they're on two ends of the scale. Monopoly's over here with one seller. Perfect competition is over here with thousands of sellers. Monopoly will charge a higher price than competitive firms. Other problems with monopoly: resources wasted are securing the monopoly privilege. To become a monopoly, you have to apply to the government, and they have to basically classify you as a legal monopoly. And monopolies can grow so big that over time they can get sort of fat, dumb, and happy, which means they're satisfied with their success, so they grow inefficient, which means they don't produce their product well. And then these are some good things about monopolies. Monopolies don't want to be regulated by the government. They don't want the government telling them what to do. So sometimes they'll keep their prices low to that. This. All right, these are the other two types: monopolistic competition and oligopoly. So we'll look at the features of those two. Let's start with monopolistic competition is the third market structure type. This is where you have hundreds of sellers instead of thousands. And oligopoly is where the fourth type, where you just have a few sellers, like between, say, 2 and 10 companies dominate an industry. A cartel, everybody thinks of a drug cartel. The word cartel has nothing to do with drugs. The word cartel is when a few companies, say 2 companies, in an oligopoly. The word oli means a few, mono means one, right? It's when a few companies decide to get together and act like one big company. They form a cartel. All right, so monopolistic competition. This word is a mashup word of a market structure where there's a lot of competition, but every company in that industry has a little monopoly over their product. That's basically why the two words go together. It contains elements of both monopoly and competition. It's easy to enter and leave the market, and the market's competitively. Here's the big thing: differentiation. They try to make companies competing with one another, try to make their products different from one another. They have physical differences. They change their location to compete with one another. They provide different services, and the image of the product is different. Here's a good example. Fast food restaurants are in monopolistically competitive environments. And so you have, I mentioned before, the Big Mac, and then you have the Whopper. It seems flatter to me, but I like the Whopper better. But anyway, these two things are packaged differently. They come in different boxes with different colors and different shapes and sizes. The same way is true with Coke, Pepsi, and soft drinks. Those get packaged. It's the way they label the drinks, and it's their logo. It's the way the can is constructed. Sometimes they do those little bottles, like little Sprite bottles and Coke bottles. And they do a lot of advertising too. Alabama Power is not going to advertise. Everybody knows them. If I sell firewood on the side of the road, I'm not going to advertise. I just set it up and people ride by and buy my firewood. These companies in a monopolistically competitive market, they have to advertise. 2/3 of the ads you see on TV are companies. Advertising, again, is huge, and they promote their product like crazy. So you see a ton of TV ads. You get tons of radio ads, and you get internet ads, and then, of course, newspaper and magazine ads, and billboards. All right, look at this. All right, here's the last one. An oligopoly is a market dominated just by a few firms. This is important for you to know. Oligopoly industries include the markets for steel, oil. Let's think about steel. You have U.S. Steel and a couple other companies. Oil, you have basically only about 4 companies: Chevron, Texaco, or I think Texaco got bought. Mobil, BP. Cars, there are only 3 car companies in America: Chrysler, which is owned by Daimler, which owns Mercedes, and Ford and General Motors. That's it. Cereals, there are only two cereal makers. And tobacco, there really are only 2 or 3 tobacco companies. You may see a bunch of different brands of cigarettes, but they're all made by those 2. It's very costly to get into a market like this. Let me throw another one in here: airlines. I can't draw. Hold on. An airline, you only have Delta, Southwest, American, United, and Continental, and Northwest. Those are the main ones. It costs a lot to differentiate their product. Now, they will differentiate in an oligopoly. Delta will have its planes painted a certain way. It'll offer certain services on the plane. Southwest, they offer, they have seats that aren't reserved, so anybody can go on and get in any seat you want. They have a more laid-back type of crew where they tell jokes and things like that. That's their way of differentiating themselves from the company. All right, now oligopolists can do something really bad. It's called collusion. Let's take the cereal companies. They did this actually about 10 years ago and they got busted for it. The cereal companies got together. These three boxes represent the cereal companies. And they got together and they got tired of competing with each other because one would lower their price and the next would say, okay, I have to compete, so I have to lower my price. And they were losing money. So they secretly got together and they decided to act like one monopoly. And they all raised their prices, big time, all at once. And none of them would go against the conspiracy. For this to work, one of them can't get out. It's like three guys that are caught robbing a bank. If one of them talks, the other two go down. If one cereal company lowers its price to get more customers, that's going to break their conspiracy. So they act like a cartel. It's a group of firms that agree to act as a single monopolist to increase the price and maximize their profits. Colluding firms produce less, they charge higher prices, and they earn more money, and they block other companies from getting in. And these are both illegal in the United States, and the cereal companies had to pay huge for that. Sometimes when oligopolists compete, you get what's called a price war. Like this happened in the airline industry right before 9/11. You had Delta started by lowering their price, and that gave them more customers. So here comes Continental lowering theirs, and then Southwest. And what happens is you get in a spiral. Well, then Delta says, well, I got to lower mine even more now to get even more customers. Continental, I got to lower mine even more now. And then what happens, the price gets too low. And now Continental starts losing tons of money. And Delta it can be really hurtful for all the companies. And again, cigarettes, computers, airline, long-distance phone, these are all industries that are ballistic. This is a great, awesome slide that ties all this stuff together. And it gives you a nice grid. This is where you go from one seller to thousands of sellers. You have maybe 2 or 3 sellers here, and you have hundreds of sellers here. So you go from the smallest here to the biggest number of companies. Number of firms, most, many, few, one. Control over price. Remember the farmer or me selling firewood? No control over his own price. Monopolist competition, a limited, oligopoly, some. Monopoly, there's only one of them, so they completely control their own price. No product differences in perfect competition, agriculture. Some, like Burger King and McDonald's. Oligopoly could have some or none, and then there are no product differences because monopoly only makes one product. There's no barrier to entry. It's very easy to start a vegetable stand or a hot dog stand and get in a perfectly competitive market. Monopolistic competition, almost all retail stores, no matter what they sell, are in a monopolistically, a monopolistically competitive industry. It's really tough to get into an oligopoly like start an airline, and it's almost insurmountable, which means you cannot overcome the barrier. It's impossible almost to start a company that is going to compete with Alabama Power. These are great examples. Focus your attention on these examples here. At the bottom, wheat, shares of stock, convenience stores, books, cars, cigarettes, and so on. All right, we're going to forego this last section here, and that will do it.